Today, we're diving into one of history's most epic military campaigns, the final siege of the First Crusade. It's an absolutely unbelievable story, really, about how a completely exhausted and starving army managed to conquer a city that everyone thought was, well, unbreakable.
So here's the big question, right? Imagine you've been marching for years, you're running low on pretty much everything, and standing in front of you is this massive stone fortress. How on earth do you get inside? You don't have cannons, no gunpowder, nothing but wood, rope, and sheer muscle. Well, that's the exact challenge the First Crusade faced at the walls of Jerusalem.
Okay, so to really understand how they pulled this off, we have to go back to the beginning. Because believe it or not, the journey to Jerusalem was just as brutal as the final battle itself. It tested these crusaders at every single turn.
The whole thing really kicks off with this incredibly powerful speech. It's 1095, and Pope Urban II gets up and calls on knights, nobles, even ordinary people all across Europe to travel to the Middle East. And this speech, it just sparked a movement that would completely change the course of history.
So why did so many people actually go? Well, their reasons were all over the map. For a lot of them, it was about a deep sense of religious duty, to protect holy sites. But for others, it was a shot at adventure, maybe a chance to get their own piece of land, or even the hope of finding a fortune far, far away from home.
But they couldn't just march straight to their final goal. Oh no. Before they could even get close, the Crusaders hit a massive wall. And I mean that literally. Their next big test really shows you just how determined they were. We're talking about the Great Siege of Antioch.
So, after marching for hundreds of miles across these hot, dusty plains, the army finally gets to Antioch. And this city, it's a fortress. It's so well defended that it just stopped their entire army dead in its tracks. They couldn't go around it, which meant they had to find a way through it.
So, what exactly is a siege? It's a pretty straightforward, if brutal, military strategy. Basically, an army surrounds a city, completely cutting it off from the outside world. The goal is to block all food, water, and any backup from getting in, and you just wait, hoping to starve the defenders until they're forced to surrender.
And let me tell you, this siege of Antioch was something else. It dragged on for months, right through a cold, wet, miserable winter. The city's walls were just too thick to break down. Things got so bad that the Crusader army ran out of food, and soldiers were actually eating their own horses to survive. As you can imagine, morale was hitting rock bottom.
Okay, so after finally capturing Antioch, thanks to a clever surprise attack at night, the completely exhausted army pushed on. This was it. They were on the final leg of their journey, heading straight for the city that had been their one and only goal from the very beginning.
And then, in June of 1099, after years of marching, starving, and fighting, they saw it. There on the horizon were the stone walls of Jerusalem. I mean, can you imagine? This was the moment they had dreamed of. This was the whole reason for their insane, incredible journey. But, and this is a big but, this was not the same huge army that had left Europe all those years ago. Not even close. Out of the tens of thousands who started, only about 12,000 were left. Just a fraction of the original force, totally exhausted, but still determined to face this final challenge. And the problems started immediately. First off, the city's defenses were massive, even stronger than Antioch's. But even worse, the defenders had poisoned all the wells nearby. So now, in the blistering summer heat, the Crusaders had no clean water. They had to carry it bucket by bucket from miles away. And this brings us right to the core of our story. The Crusaders were staring at an almost impossible engineering problem. How in the world do you get over walls that were specifically designed to be unconquerable? Yeah, simple ladders weren't going to cut it against walls this high. They needed huge, complex siege engines. But there was a massive problem. The entire landscape around Jerusalem was barren. There were almost no trees. And no wood meant no way to build the very machines they needed to win. But then, they got a lucky break. Scouts found a hidden patch of forest miles and miles away. They even started taking apart their own supply ships to get extra timber. With this precious wood, their craftsmen worked day and night to build 2 gigantic movable siege towers, each one several stories tall. And to protect them from flaming arrows, they covered the outside in wet animal hides. Pretty clever, right? Okay, so on July 13th, 1099, the final assault began. The Crusaders were smart about it. They attacked from 2 different sides of the city at the same time to split the defense. That first day was just a brutal, grinding fight. The defenders were throwing everything they had, fire, giant rocks, down onto the towers. But then, on the second day, one of those towers finally got close enough.
This was the breakthrough moment. A knight named Godfrey of Bouillon managed to get his massive wooden tower right up against the stone wall. From the top, his men dropped a wooden bridge, and just like that, it connected the tower directly to the ramparts. For the very first time, the attackers were on the wall.
From there, this small group of knights fought their way along the top of the wall and scrambled down to one of the main city gates. They smashed the locks and threw the huge doors open from the inside. And just like that, the unbreakable defense was shattered. The entire Crusader army poured into the city streets. The siege was over.
Now, the capture of Jerusalem was a massive turning point, but the story doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. The aftermath of this victory and its consequences would end up shaping the Middle East for hundreds of years.
And it's really important we talk about what happened next. The capture of the city was followed by a really terrible wave of violence. After years of hardship and fighting, the victorious army swept through the city, and historical accounts describe a truly tragic scene where both soldiers and civilians suffered immensely. In the aftermath, the Crusaders set up a whole new state, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and Godfrey of Bouillon, the guy who led the charge on the wall, was chosen to be its first leader. But here's a really interesting twist. He refused the title of king. He said he would not wear a crown of gold in the same city where Savior had worn a crown of thorns.
When you look at the big picture, the long-term impact was just huge. The First Crusade created these new European-run states right in the Middle East. It opened up major trade routes, which brought all sorts of new goods and technologies back to Europe. But, and this is key, it also created these deep, lasting tensions between different faiths and cultures, tensions that would fuel conflict for centuries to come.
So, in the end, the Crusaders had done it. They had achieved their goal against absolutely impossible odds. But their victory wasn't really an ending at all. It was a new beginning. And that leaves us with one big question. By creating this new kingdom right in the heart of the Middle East, what new and maybe even bigger conflicts were now waiting just over the horizon?